My name is Alexei. I'm a pilot, or at least I was trying to be one, barely 21 years old, and already carrying the weight of 100 lost battles on my shoulders. I was flying a reliable, but aging, Yak-3 back in the summer of '44. A good machine, but slow. Too slow against the Messerschmitts and the Focke-Wulfs that constantly swarmed the skies over our sector. We were taking losses, crushing losses. Every dawn felt less like a new day, and more like a cruel, statistical certainty. The mood in the fighter regiments was heavy, thick with exhaustion and quiet fear. We needed a miracle. We needed a weapon that could level the playing field. Then, the rumors started. Whispers about a new machine coming to the front, built specifically for the low to medium altitude dogfighting, where the Germans always seemed to dominate. They called it the Yak-3. When the first crate arrived, painted in the dull Soviet camouflage, the reactions were not what the designers had hoped for. "Look at that little thing, Volodya," my friend Kirill muttered, leaning against the wing of his own fighter. "It looks like a mosquito trying to swallow a cannon." It was small, unbelievably compact. The fuselage was sleek, yes, but its size gave it a deceptively fragile appearance. The engineers, who had come up with it, looked nervous as they presented it to us grizzled veterans and shell-shocked newcomers. "It's lighter, faster, cleaner," the lead engineer, a tired man named Sergei, explained, tracing the line of the wing with his finger. "We've traded some armor for velocity. It's built for a knife fight." A knife fight. We'd been in too many knife fights we couldn't win. The real skepticism, though, was not among us, but over the radio. The Germans, with their uncanny ability to pick up on any new development, had clearly seen the Yak-3s making their test runs near the lines. The first time I heard the German chatter, it was during a quiet patrol. A high-flying Focke-Wulf pilot, probably an arrogant Hauptmann, was clearly enjoying himself. His voice crackled through the static, full of condescending laughter. "The Soviets are sending up toys for rookies now. Look at that tiny thing. It's an engine with wings, nothing more. Too small to even register on my gun sight." The laughter was contagious among his comrades. They derisively nicknamed it the Little Sparrow, and the insult stung more than a bullet. They saw it as desperation, a sign that the Soviet Union was running out of capable machines and sending up undersized junk. We pilots exchanged silent glances, the sting of the mockery fueling the resentment we already felt. They looked down on us. They called our salvation a joke, but the fear was still there, chilling me to the bone. This small machine, this new hope, felt like another roll of the dice in a game we had been consistently losing. What if they were right? What if this light, fast fighter was too fragile? What if its limited range and armament meant we were simply flying faster to our deaths? 2 days later, the orders came down. We were to fly the Yak-3 into a critical sector, providing high-altitude cover for our advancing armor. The Germans knew we were coming. They were ready. I climbed into the cockpit of the new fighter, the tight confines making me feel both exposed and powerfully focused. It was sleek, silent, and felt like a rocket when I pushed the throttle. But as I took off, the German taunt echoed in my mind. A toy for rookies. We were about to see if the toy could fly, or if we were just offering the Luftwaffe 3 more easy kills. I knew the moment I broke through the clouds, I would be staring down the guns of the best aces the enemy had. I just hoped this little machine wouldn't dissolve on impact. The climb was unlike anything I had experienced in the old Yak-1. The Yak-3 didn't strain. It simply gathered speed and altitude with a shocking eagerness. The little fighter was light, perhaps too light, but that lightness translated into sheer, exhilarating acceleration. I felt like I wasn't flying an airplane, but guiding a projectile. We reached our combat altitude quickly. The sky was a pale, late morning blue, perfect for visibility, perfect for hunting. My wingman, Misha, a good-natured farm boy who was always humming folk tunes, sounded tense over the radio. "Alexei, I see them. 3 contacts, high, coming in fast from the west. Looks like 190s, heavy fighters. Focke-Wulf FW-190s, the butchers, as we called them. They were robust, well-armored, and flew like bricks in a low-speed turn, but at high speed, they were fearsome. And these weren't just any pilots. These were clearly a flight of aces. Their formation was tight, arrogant, designed to scare us off before a shot was fired. "They've seen us," I radioed back, my voice dry. "They are coming down for the attack. Remember the plan, Misha. Don't engage head-on. Don't try to outmuscle them, outturn them." The Germans opened fire from absurdly long range, a sign of confidence that quickly shifted to overconfidence. Their rounds missed widely. As they roared past, closing the gap, they spread out for their attack run, That's when I saw it. The lead FW-190, a magnificent, intimidating machine, sported 3 rows of kill markings. A triple ace. My stomach clenched. This was exactly the kind of deadly duel the new plane was supposed to win. Yet my body screamed for me to retreat. This was no toy, but the butcher was certainly no rookie. The ace banked hard to line up on my tail. He was faster on the dive, as expected, but as he began his turn to settle behind me, the new realization hit. I threw the Yak-3 into a sharp vertical maneuver, a tight, corkscrew climb. The FW-190, still heavy and unforgiving in a sudden change of direction, struggled to keep up. This little sparrow didn't struggle. It turned on a kopeck. I was climbing and banking with such an impossible radius that for a horrifying, thrilling second, I saw the German pilot's face, shocked, helmeted, but visible, as I slashed across his line of flight. I pulled hard, gaining a clear firing solution on his undercarriage. Instinct took over. I squeezed the trigger, unleashing the synchronized 20mm cannon and the machine guns. The effect was instantaneous and shocking. The high explosive shells ripped through the Focke-Wulf's engine cowling. It coughed a thick cloud of black smoke, then violently erupted into a ball of flame. The wreckage spiraled away. One down. The triple ace was gone. The entire exchange took perhaps 20 seconds. The other 2 German pilots, seeing their leader, a legend of their Geschwader, destroyed with such ruthless speed, reacted with panic. They abandoned the textbook formation. One pilot, clearly trying to save face and avenge his comrade, made a desperate, wide, sweeping turn. That was his mistake. With the superior speed and climb rate, I was on him before he finished his turn. It wasn't even a duel, it was an ambush. A short, vicious burst, and the second Focke-Wulf tumbled, its wing fracturing. 2 Luftwaffe aces were down. The third pilot didn't even try to engage. He saw the cold, efficient slaughter of his comrades and did the only sensible thing. He slammed the throttle forward and bolted. He went into a shallow, high-speed dive, trying to escape the fight. "He's running, Alexei! The ace is running!" Misha's voice, now a mix of disbelief and adrenaline, crackled over the radio. I didn't hesitate. I pushed the stick and went after him. Even the vaunted straight-line speed of the Focke-Wulf was not enough. I felt the Yak-3's incredible velocity eating up the distance. The German pilot was glancing nervously over his shoulder, twisting and dipping, but there was nowhere to hide. I closed to firing range, delivered another measured burst, and watched the third machine shudder before plunging into the distant tree line. 3 Luftwaffe aces were down. Silence followed, broken only by my own ragged breathing and Misha's stunned cheer. I had just witnessed and executed the most decisive and lopsided victory of my career. The mocking laughter of the German radio from yesterday was choked off, replaced by a sudden, terrifying silence. We didn't know it yet, but the rules of engagement had just been rewritten, and a new kind of fear had begun to grip the enemy. We landed back at the airstrip, and the silence from the ground crew was heavier than any engine noise. They had heard Misha's report. They had seen the shock in our faces, the adrenaline still vibrating in our hands. 3 kills, 3 established aces, gone in one brutal engagement. The initial reaction wasn't celebration, it was disbelief. Our commander, Ivan Petrov, a man whose face was normally set in concrete, simply stared at the Yak-3. He ran a hand over the sleek, unbroken wing, almost as if checking that the machine was real, solid, and not some phantom of our exhausted minds. "Alexei," he said, his voice quiet, "tell me exactly how you closed that gap on the last one." The Focke-Wulf pilot was diving for speed. I explained, my voice regaining its strength as I remembered the feeling. "Sir, it wasn't a dive. The German pilot was running flat out. But the Yak-3, it just kept accelerating. It felt like I was driving a needle through the air. The speed advantage is absolute at this altitude." That was the silent shift. The initial mockery, the toy for rookies jibe, was replaced by a grim realization. We finally had a machine that could outrun their best in a straight line when it mattered most, and outturn them in a desperate maneuver. We realized that the designers hadn't just built a new fighter. They had fundamentally changed the tactical equation. The victory, however, was not just tactical, it was psychological. Within hours, the German radio chatter was frantic. They weren't laughing anymore. We picked up encoded messages, but even through the static and code, the anxiety was palpable. Later, our intelligence debrief confirmed the true impact. The 3 pilots we had downed were not just any aces. They were the backbone of a specific Jagdgeschwader that had been terrorizing our bombers for weeks. One of them, a major with the Knight's Cross, was a name known across the entire front. The news spread through the Soviet regiments like wildfire. The sight of 3 plumes of smoke had done more for morale than a month of propaganda. But the most telling sign of change came the next morning. We were scheduled for a high-value reconnaissance escort, a mission that usually guaranteed an immediate, aggressive response from the Luftwaffe. We took off, expecting the usual swarm, the usual desperate dogfight. Instead, we met silence. The sky was eerily clear. We flew our entire route. Not a single German fighter approached our formation. No Messerschmitts, no Focke-Wulfs. Even the high-altitude observation flights they usually use to annoy us were absent. Kirill was flying wingman, his voice low with caution.
Alexei, where are they? It's like a holiday. They're watching, Kirill,
I replied, scanning the empty blue space.
They're trying to figure out what happened. They lost 3 top men to a toy. Their route commanders are busy rewriting their playbooks.
The truth was, the enemy had gone quiet, not out of respect, but out of fear. They had tasted the speed and sudden, brutal efficiency of the Yak-3. They were analyzing the wreckage, trying to understand how such a small, lightweight fighter could deliver such a massive punch and disappear before they could react. The mockery had evaporated. The challenge now was to use this newfound advantage, this brief window of terror we had opened, to dominate the skies completely, turning every flight into a systematic hunt. Our new plane was no longer a sparrow or a toy. It was becoming a cold, sharp, lethal instrument. The subsequent mission solidified the legend. The engineers had built a racehorse, and we were learning how to ride it like a predator. The focus shifted entirely from dogfighting, the chaotic, desperate tangle of old, to precision hunting. The Yak-3's performance dictated a new doctrine, what we veterans quickly and reverently called the Hunter's Code. The code was simple. Speed is your shield, and turning is your knife. We learned that when we spotted the German formations, we were not to initiate the engagement from a distance, nor allow them to dictate the pace. We would climb higher, using the Yak-3's superior rate of climb to position ourselves above the sun, and then we would descend like hawks. The sheer acceleration made the Focke-Wulf pilots, who prided themselves on their diving speed, look sluggish. They simply couldn't outrun the Yak-3 once we were on their tail. I remember one patrol where my flight encountered 4 Messerschmitt Bf-109s escorting bombers. Before the Yak-3, engaging 4 was madness. It meant a desperate brawl where attrition always favored the Germans. Now, it was a formula. We split up, using the small size of the Yak-3 to make us hard targets. I focused on one, Me-109, using a shallow dive to gain immense speed. The German pilot saw me coming and tried to escape in a straight line, relying on the speed his plane was known for. It was futile. I closed the distance so fast, it felt like the Messerschmitt was suspended in the air. The pilot's panic was almost palpable, even from my vantage point. He knew his speed advantage was gone. My burst was short, delivered from point-blank range, ensuring maximum damage to the fuel lines. A flash, a streak of smoke, and he was gone. My wingman, Volodya, a former skeptic who now flew with the zeal of a convert, was a sight to behold. He'd throw the Yak-3 into turns that would have ripped the wings off our old planes. The Germans, trying to follow, would simply stall out or lose all their energy. We watched as they desperately tried to outturn the little sparrow, and failed every time, leaving them exposed and slow. The victories kept piling up. We weren't fighting for survival anymore. We were fighting for trophies. Every mission turned into a hunt, and the losses of the enemy became legendary. The German pilots quickly learned that if a small, sleek fighter suddenly appeared high above them, their best bet was not to fight, but to break formation and run for the nearest cloud bank. It was during this period of absolute aerial dominance that our ground crew, the men who maintained the fragile perfection of the machine, started calling the Yak-3 something different. Not a sparrow, not a toy. They called it the blade in the sky. It was a perfect description. Sharp, fast, lethal, and demanding total focus from the hand that wielded it. The plane didn't forgive errors, but in the hands of a disciplined pilot, it cut through the German formations with terrifying ease. We had moved from being the prey to being the unchallenged apex predator. The most unsettling change came not in the sound of combat, but in the silence. After weeks of unrelenting, systematic victories, trophies earned in swift, decisive engagements, the German aggression seemed to collapse entirely. We would fly missions over the front lines, missions that were previously magnets for heavy resistance, and the skies would be utterly and terrifyingly empty. Kirill and I were flying a low-level sweep one afternoon, expecting at least a token patrol, but finding nothing but peaceful, green countryside far below.
Alexei,
Kirill radioed, his voice hushed. This is unnatural. It's too quiet. It feels like they're waiting to spring a trap.
No trap, Kirill.
I replied, running my hand over the throttle. The engine felt impatient, eager to find a challenge. They're not setting a trap. They're avoiding one. They're avoiding us. Intelligence reports confirmed our suspicion. The losses inflicted by the Yak-3 regiments had reached a critical mass. The names of the downed German aces were too numerous, too public, and the speed of their destruction was too demoralizing. The internal communications we intercepted, previously full of bravado, now sounded defeated. They had lost the confidence to engage. The tactical response from the Luftwaffe command was drastic. They simply refused to engage with Yak-3 flights. I remember reading a translated order from a German Geschwader commander. It was an astonishing document, treating the Yak-3 not as an aircraft, but as a meteorological hazard. It instructed pilots to change their standard operational routes just to avoid encountering our fighter. Their mission parameters now included a geographical avoidance zone, centered entirely on where they expected the little sparrows to be flying. It was an unprecedented psychological victory. The enemy was so terrified of the speed and tight turning radius of our machine that they were willing to abandon air superiority rather than face the inevitable, swift end. Their best planes, the powerful, heavily armed Focke-Wulfs and Messerschmitts, were effectively grounded in our sector, their pilots forbidden to even try to outrun the blade. This refusal created a bizarre, almost surreal atmosphere. We were now the undisputed lords of the sky, yet our days were spent not in glorious dogfights, but in lengthy, boring patrols. We flew, knowing that the fear of the Yak-3 was doing half our job for us, but the silence was its own kind of terror. When the enemy hides, the tension doesn't ease, it coils. We knew they weren't gone. They were regrouping, rethinking, desperately trying to find an answer to the small, fast killer that had rewritten the rules of aerial combat. The legend of the Yak-3 was no longer born in offices or design halls. It was forged in the absolute, paralyzing fear that now governed German air routes. We were a physical manifestation of that terror, the silent, unseen force that dictated where they could and could not fly. We waited for them to find an answer, knowing that when they returned, the duels would be even deadlier. The legend of the Yak-3 solidified not just through the grim silence on the enemy's radio, but through the booming confidence among our own pilots and ground crews. We no longer saw ourselves as simply flying fighters. We were wielding the blade in the sky. The stories began immediately. There was Volodya, who, in a single day, intercepted and destroyed 4 Focke-Wulfs attempting a low-altitude attack on a bridge, simply because the Germans couldn't believe anything could catch them so close to the ground. There was Kirill, whose flight cornered a lone reconnaissance Messerschmitt, and instead of immediately shooting it down, flew around it in a perfect, intimidating circle, forcing the German to land in our territory and surrender just to escape the terror of the agile, buzzing Yak-3s. These weren't just kills. They were demonstrations of air supremacy so profound they felt almost mythical. The ground crews treated the planes with a fervent devotion. They would polish the metal until it gleamed, arguing that the cleaner the fuselage, the more speed we gained, as if caring for the machine was an act of worship. They believed every successful mission was proof of the Yak-3's absolute, inherent superiority. "Alexei, another 10 victories on the Eastern Front today," our commander Petrov announced one evening at dinner. 9 of them belonged to the Yak-3 regiments. Every Yak-3 mission turned into a hunt, and the trophies were legendary. The atmosphere in our regiment changed completely. The fear of being shot down was replaced by the intense focus and almost zealous anticipation of the hunt. We studied the sky not to survive, but to find the perfect angle, the perfect moment to deploy the blade. We learned to think like predators, knowing that the enemy was already operating under a heavy psychological burden. I started to see the battles not as chaotic melees, but as chess games played at 500 kilometers per hour. The German pilots, constrained by their heavy, powerful machines and their command's fear, could only make predictable moves. We, in our small, nimble fighters, could violate every one of their expectations. We could appear out of nowhere, deliver a killing blow, and vanish before their wingmen could react. The veterans amongst us, the men who had flown through the brutal early years of the war, often reflected on the sheer impossibility of what we were achieving. "We fought with heart before," one old mechanic, Victor, told me while wiping oil from a propeller. "But this machine gives our heart a voice." The legend wasn't born in offices, but in deadly duels above the front. It was born when that first ace went down, and the others realized there was no escape from that speed. The sense of destiny was powerful. We knew we were flying not just a plane, but a turning point. We were pushing the line forward, not just with bombs and infantry, but with pure, technological dominance in the air. We were creating a zone of control, a bubble of safety for our troops below, defined by the lethality of our small, fast fighter. But even as the legend grew, the pit of my stomach held a kernel of caution. The Germans were desperate. They were not beaten. They were just wounded and hiding. And I knew that eventually they would find one determined pilot. One pilot who was arrogant enough, or suicidal enough, to try and prove the blade in the sky could be broken. The enemy's fear was a shield, but every shield has a weak point. I knew the prolonged silence meant desperation was brewing on the other side, and desperation breeds recklessness, which sometimes, tragically, turns into genius. We had been airborne for nearly an hour, patrolling deep behind the retreating German lines, when Misha spotted him. Alexei, one contact. High, fast. Looks like a Messerschmitt 109G, but he's alone, and he's coming right at us. The isolation was the first warning sign. No German pilot flew alone against a Yak-3 flight unless he was either foolish or determined to make a statement. As the gap closed, I saw the paintwork. The Me-109 was immaculate, its nose adorned not with neat rows of kills, but with a stylized, snarling wolf's head. He was a champion, a true expertise, sent specifically to challenge the new order. He's not breaking, I radioed, my heart pounding. This was the duel I had been anticipating. A test not just of the Yak-3, but of the hunter's code against pure, unadulterated aggression. The German opened fire from a distance that was still too great, but it wasn't a warning shot. It was a precise, calculated burst designed to force us into a defensive maneuver. He was trying to dictate the fight. We turned sharply, using the Yak-3's superior agility to dodge his attack. I knew if I let him engage us in his preferred style, a fast, high-energy pass, he would have the advantage of altitude and weight. I had to pull him into the knife fight. Misha, break wide. I'm dragging him low. I throttled back slightly and threw the blade into a tight, sustained turn, something the Messerschmitt simply couldn't sustain without losing all its energy. The German ace, however, was exceptionally good. He recognized the trap, and instead of following me, he performed a quick, precise split S, dropping out of the sky to gain speed and immediately climbed back up from the opposite direction. He was forcing a vertical battle. We traded position, neither of us gaining a clear advantage for nearly 3 minutes, an eternity in aerial combat. He was flying with a rage I hadn't encountered before, trying to prove that his skill, his machine, and his will were enough to shatter the myth of the Yak-3. He managed to get on my tail for a horrifying moment. I felt the sharp thump, thump of his cannon rounds hitting my armored seat, the sound instantly drowning out the engine noise. The little Yak-3 shuddered, the smell of burnt oil hitting my nostrils. Damage. I pushed the stick hard, knowing this was the moment of truth. I slammed the throttle forward, relying on the Yak-3's insane acceleration to literally outrun him in a sustained, high-speed turn. The G-forces mashed me into my seat. The Messerschmitt pilot, heavy and struggling, fell slightly behind. I gained the necessary few meters, and, instead of continuing the turn, I pulled up into a near-vertical climb. It was a risky, desperate maneuver, a classic Yak specialty. The Messerschmitt, trying to follow, stalled almost immediately. He hung there, helpless, silhouetted against the sky. This was the moment of the hunter. I rolled inverted and delivered a single, disciplined burst. I didn't spray the air. I delivered the deadly accuracy that the small, focused armament of the Yak-3 demanded. The rounds hit the Me-109's cockpit and engine block. The Wolf's head insignia seemed to disappear in a flash of smoke. The plane didn't explode. It simply ceased to be a functioning aircraft, falling away in a lifeless, twisting plunge. Misha's voice was subdued. He's down, Alexei, but that was different. It was. That pilot was a genius. He had forced me to fight outside the established doctrine, pushing the Yak-3 to its absolute limit. But the limit was higher than the German could reach. Small, fast, and deadly accurate, the Yak-3 was not just a deterrent. It was the superior machine, even against a pilot trying to rewrite the rules with sheer skill. I flew back with a damaged tail and a renewed, profound respect for the desperate enemy. They had sent their best to try and break the legend, and we had sent him home in pieces. The supremacy was absolute. I landed the damaged Yak-3, the bullet holes in the fuselage, a stark reminder of how close the duel had been. The ground crew swarmed the plane, treating its wounds with the same urgency and affection they would show a fallen comrade. They weren't just fixing a machine. They were restoring the blade. That duel with the lone Messerschmitt ace was the final, definitive answer to the Luftwaffe's challenge. He had thrown all his skill and courage at us, trying to find a flaw in the Yak-3's design or a weakness in our doctrine. He found none. He simply confirmed that a new era of aerial combat had arrived, one ruled by speed, maneuverability, and the psychological weight of an absolute advantage. The impact was immediate and long-lasting. After that last, high-profile loss, the German command tightened the wall of refusal even further. They stopped sending single-challenge aircraft. They stopped attempting to engage our patrols entirely. Their only response became avoidance. The phrase the Luftwaffe once used, "a toy for rookies," was dead. In its place was a grudging, terrified respect. They knew we were flying machines that demanded excellence, and that only the best pilots, those who had fully embraced the hunter's code, could master them. The truth was, the Yak-3 didn't just win battles. It rewrote the rules of aerial combat. It forced the enemy to abandon their established, heavily armored designs and shift their focus to matching our speed, a shift that took time they simply didn't have. For us, the effect was profound. We continued to fly, dominating the low to medium altitude airspace crucial for supporting our infantry and armor. I often think back to that very first mission. The nervous excitement, the cold fear, and the sheer audacity of the German laughter echoing in my headset. That laughter had been a symbol of their superiority, their belief that the air belonged to them. But that day, in the space of 30 breathtaking seconds, we proved them fatally wrong. We showed them that the small, quick fighter was not a toy, but a purpose-built precision instrument. It wasn't about the size of the cannon. It was about the speed at which you delivered the round and the impossibility of escaping the following turn. We forced the ace to run. We forced the German command to change their maps. We forced the proudest pilots in the world to refuse the fight. My days as a Yak-3 pilot solidified my belief. The true measure of a weapon is not its size or its armor, but the fear it instills in the enemy. And the small, fast, and deadly accurate Yak-3 instilled a fear that was absolute. The war would continue, but for me, and for the young pilots who flew the blade, the question of aerial supremacy had been settled. We had achieved final rewriting of the air war, and the German pilots never laughed again.